With BlizzCon fast approaching, I'm guessing maybe we'll have an expansion reveal for World of Warcraft. I don't want to talk about could it be the Void, could it be maybe the Open Seas expansion with Naga, but rather what I think could possibly be in the content. Before I continue on, we could probably have a patch 7.35 that opens on Taurus Raid, maybe a patch 7.4 that people are suggesting might be a small raid like a TOV, but it looks like 7.3 might be the ending towards Legion, as we'll be fighting off Argus, the planet, or the core of the planet, which, I mean, I couldn't think of a better boss, except Sargeras, but a core of the planet? Sure, let's make it a boss. So with the possibility of this being the last content patch and BlizzCon fast approaching, maybe Blizzard will unveil what their idea might be for the next expansion really soon. I don't really want to talk about the themes of what the next expansion might be, whether it be the Void or the Naga, but I kind of want to talk about what I think could be the content, what I think could be some of the different changes in the game, kind of like a wish listy video, but also what I think is yet to come and might happen, and I have some supporting ideas to follow. So I hope you guys enjoy my list, and maybe you'll share some of your own ideas of what you think will happen in the next expansion for World of Warcraft, if we're going to receive one in this BlizzCon, and what Blizzard might end up doing in the future of World of Warcraft, or what you hope they end up doing. Without further ado, let's begin my list. It's hard to say exactly what they will do for classes, but I'm pretty sure class changes are going to happen. They end up using most of Legion to establish a good class fantasy, but I think now they're going to be chiseling the rough edges of just about every single class. While I'm not a mage main, I'm just somebody who messes around with a mage, I feel like mages are going to get adjusted. After playing Frost, Fire, and Arcane for PvE and PvP, it feels to me that Frost is just so smooth in terms of this gameplay. You combo spells together while you have all the magic elements, and you have constant slow, which just makes the spec feel so good no matter whether you're doing world quest or PvP. The combinations of spells, it just flows so well. You can combo together a Glacial Spike, Flurry, Ice Lance, Artifact Weapon, Flurry, Ice Lance, drop the, Frozen Orb, Ice Lance, pop AoE so you can get your Frozen Orb back, build up Icicles, and there's so many ways to play in terms of talents. With Fire, it just seems like you pop Combustion and you're just trying to just cast as many spells as you can. It just feels really rushed and weird. And Arcane, it's in a weird situation where at first you start the fight with a burst, and then you have like this down phase, and then you have this burst phase, and then this down phase. While in PvP, those specializations play so differently. With Fire, you just, I guess, still the same. You're like a chicken without a head casting spells. And Arcane, you blink around all over the place, which is cool. But you cast Arcane Explosion because it's easier for PvP. I feel like there's just disconnect. While Frost is pretty sustainable, pretty, I guess, consistent throughout all aspects of the game. And one thing, it just feels so smooth to play. It's just so evident. It feels very smooth to play. So I feel like mages are going to have some work redone. Speaking about some work redone, here's a class I can actually talk about and kind of know what I'm talking about, if you might not agree with my mage comment. I feel like Outlaw Rogues are going to get changed to Combat Rogues. I think they're going to get reverted. Maybe not in name. They might keep the name Outlaw because it sounds really cool. They might have some piratey themes to it, but I think for the most part, it's going to be back to old Combat Rogues. I feel that the RNG aspect is just not worth, whether it be in legendaries or within a class mechanic. Like, so many people made a big fit about World of Bones, where I played and it's not really a big deal because it really isn't, but a lot of people just hate it. So a lot of people went to Assassination and Subtlety and completely missed out the joys of Outlaw simply because of the World of Bones mechanic, just the fact that it exists. Like, people hated it. Because of that hate, a lot of people said, what if they brought back Combat Rogues? You would have Slice and Dice, you would have your Saber Slash or Sinister Strike. They might even bring back the Deep Insight mechanic if they wanted to, or simply just take that away and make the spec deal good consistent damage at all times without particularly having a burst. Either way, you would have Combat Rogues, which are a lot easier to balance. You have one buff, you have one mechanic, you have one way of playing. That's all you have, is just a consistent way of going about your class. While you have an Outlaw, which is a balancing nightmare. You gotta balance each buff, you gotta balance the buff combos, you gotta adjust the percent chance of you getting what buff you get, and then you gotta adjust the cooldown reduction mechanic that plays with the specialization, but also you gotta adjust buffs that play with that cooldown reduction mechanic. For a developer, I would think that would be a complete nightmare, so maybe that's why we haven't had too many Outlaw Rogue changes happening. I feel like they could have revamped the whole specialization, but they didn't. I'm not sure if it's because it's hard to revamp it or it's hard to make some really big significant changes, but so far the changes they have done have been really minuscule and really minor, not enough to really adjust and address the big just shining issues that the specialization had. They never really addressed any of it. I don't know if maybe it's because it's hard to balance, and it could be because the specialization does kind of seem like a nightmare to balance. You have all the different buffs, you gotta balance how each buff interacts, the percent chance of what buff you have. What if you get this and this buff and it's really OP, but this and this buff is really bad? If one buff is really bad, but this other buff is really OP, it's just a nightmare. So it would make sense to make the spec more consistent, make players happier, and bring back the old combat rogue. Easier to manage, more consistent. A lot of players wish for it, and a lot of players just can't be bothered to learn the RNG mechanic, which isn't bad. And I try to make a good deal of trying to teach people the RNG mechanic of Outlaw, but I completely understand the struggles they have with it as well. Another change I think that'll happen is the normalization of demon hunters. And it seems that just about every single class that'd be in the game, whether it be Death Knight, Monk, or Demon Hunter, they had a pretty big explosion and they got crazy good, except for monks who were actually really bad. And then they got really good, and then they got normalized. And Legion, we had Demon Hunters who got really good and really OP, and then they got nerfed, buffed, and nerfed, and I think they'll add a lot more abilities in the next patch and normalize Demon Hunters. I feel that they will change the mechanic of metamorphosis. Instead of being a big old one-shot mechanic, I think it'll work like the Insanity mechanic or Demonic Fury from previous expansions for Warlocks. I feel that what they will do is they'll build up their Fury, and then they'll transform into Demon and try to maintain the Fury for as long as they can, and use similar mechanics of a Shadow Priest or Demonic Fury mechanics of a Warlock back from Mr. Pandaria and even Warlord's General. Because those mechanics are pretty consistent, and even though they're rampy, I feel like for a melee, rampy mechanics would be a lot easier to deal with, as it's a melee. They deal good damage no matter what they do, and for them to ramp up would just mean that they'll have damage a little bit at a delay. But I feel like for Demon Hunters to go into demon form a lot more often would be more fun, it'll be more consistent, it'll make the spec thematically more interesting. And for PvP, I think they'll actually take advantage of the mana burn mechanic that they tried to add but didn't really do it successfully. I feel like this spec is going to be more about mana burning against casters and against healers, and I think that's going to be its uniqueness for PvP. I feel that for content, they'll start utilizing old zones and make them reused. I mean, there's a lot of empty space, and there's nothing really there except quests. So they could just go and start using those spaces for, let's say, different types of world quests for an example. I feel that while the invasions worked well, the demonic invasions worked really exceptionally well, they could basically implement the same engine and the same mechanics to make the rest of the world feel alive again. I think that could work really well for the spec. They maybe could have different reputation types and styles with different parts of different realms. Like for Kalimdor, you would have one rep that you would grind with World Quest and would scale the content. And you would have maybe Kalimdor or Eastern Kingdoms or Northern or Pandaria areas, and you could just go back to the zones that you remember, go back to the zones you liked and the ones that were nostalgic, and grind different rep and reuse the same content you've had before. So you would have familiar lands and familiar places, but a lot more stuff to do in places you've already been to. So I think that could be a cool mechanic that they might implement in the future, because why not? I feel that the RNG aspects of gear will still stay in the game, even for PvP. I mean, it's so exciting to just randomly get this awesome legendary, this really nice and shiny item. Oh, people get excited. Like, there's compilations of people excited over them getting some random pieces of gear. They're so happy. In PvE, RNG has always been a thing when it comes to, let's say, fighting bosses and farming bosses again and again and again until that last trinket that you need drops, or that 2-piece, 4-piece bonus drops, or that specific best in slot item finally drops. I feel like the RNG, because of the hype that it delivers, will stay in the game. But I'm sad to say that I think they will still keep the RNG even for PvP. As much as they try to improve PvP, I still think they'll do like a gear is gear thing for PvE or PvP, so then it won't really make sense to implement like a point system just for PvPers to get the gear they specifically want. So just to not ostracize anybody from PvE or PvP side of the game, I think they'll basically keep the RNG system in the game for as long as they can, really. Which segues perfectly into the next point, legendaries. I think those shiny orange items will stay in the game no matter what happens. They're too exciting for players to get, they're too hype, and I feel like once you put them in, they're like flying mounts. If you try to take them away, I feel like everybody is just gonna have a fit, and it's not really a bad thing, but imagine if they took away flying mounts, like no more flying, can't fly in the game. Like, what are we gonna do with all the dragons and griffins and birds and all the other forms of aviation transportation that we gotten over the time being? I mean, they'll have to keep flying in the game for the rest of whatever the duration this game has. But with legendaries, they added this nice, interesting form of excitement of getting that nice orange item. I don't think they'll be able to take it back. I think they'll make him less impactful in terms of just flat DPS increases. I think they'll be more utilitarian or defensive in nature, like maybe like pants that do healing if you use certain abilities, like maybe like W healing of this ability, or give you another charge of this mobility. And they might be helpful in some Mythic Plus content or some World PvP stuff, but I think for the most part, generally, they'll be more or less just roundabout legendaries that don't really affect you as much as they do currently in Legion. World quests, I think those will stay in the game, and they've been pretty good as a form of content. It's a good system of dailies, but it's dailies that people get to choose. Technically, you don't need to do world quests, but people that end up doing theirs get a lot of gear, get a lot of resources, a lot of maybe mats, a lot they can farm when it comes to PvP or PvE. They get a lot further ahead than some of the other players when they put in the time to just get their dailies done. And the grind pays off, so it's almost like it's voluntary. It doesn't say, oh, you need to do this rep, you know, all these dailies to farm a certain rep. But if you want flying, you might as well do these dailies. Oh, you've done 4 of them? Well, you can do more if you wanna, but only 4 for the daily if you want it. And you could choose which ones you want, so you can do the easy ones or all the hard ones. It creates this form of content that's really just doesn't force you to do it, but you might as well do it anyway. It also brings you a little bit of variety in terms of the content you do. It creates a little bit of aspects of exploration, as you might go to corners of a map that you've never even thought of, and there might be a fun quest there with a fun scenery. It also offers a lot more incentive to do group gameplay and group content, as people can group together to take on some challenging world quests, whether it be certain bosses or whether it be, I don't know, certain fights or certain mobs or certain mechanics that can be done in a group setting and can be done that much faster if you have a group with you. The last part, AP weapons will be gone. That's what a lot of people are suggesting. But I think some sort of a trinket system or a minuscule version, like a way smaller version of an artifact point system or artifact weapon system, maybe in the form of a trinket, will still stay in the game in some manner or another. It'll probably be less grinding than AP, but it'll probably still be linked to doing, let's say, your daily dungeon, your daily BG, your daily whatever, in order to advance this some sort of system. I feel like if it does have this whole trait system for AP, it might be maybe a fourth, but it'll still be somewhat impactful. It might be one of those things that will be more impactful towards the end game of the expansion, and it might have some forms of, you know, you get to choose which traits you want. Maybe there'll be a choice like talents, but it'll be very, very minor, and it'll be more like a throwback towards artifact weapons rather than a full system that they might build upon. Because I feel like artifact weapon thing might be something that might play a part and might be something that you can keep grinding for, but I don't think it'll be the main aspect of the game that everybody will be working on for the rest of the expansion. I feel like once they've done it, if they were to do it too many times, it will just get old and stale. But that's my list, what I think will come in the next expansion. What are your guys' thoughts, and what would you put on your list? Leave me that in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see all of you in yet another video.